Hello.
Hello.
Yes, hi, this is Sitaram from 4 Points.
Hey everyone, we're going to be getting started here in just a few minutes. If there's any questions or comments, go ahead and put them in the chat, and happy to answer those for you. So like I said, get started here in about 5 or 6 minutes, and then we'll be on our way. Thank you. Welcome to everybody that's joined or is starting to join. We'll get started here in about 2 or 3 minutes. So if there's any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Otherwise, like I said, we'll get started here in about 2 or 3 minutes. Welcome everybody that's joined or is joining. We're just about ready to start. Looks like we have a pretty full group. So just wait another probably 30 seconds. Throughout today's session, if there's any questions, go ahead and put in the chat. One of my peers, Odell, is helping out today. And so he and I will be taking an eye on that chat and seeing if there's anything that comes up. But let's go ahead and let's go here. We're ready, I think. So yeah, we're good. So welcome everybody. My name is Josh Brothheim. I am the training manager at Sumo Logic. And what we're going to be doing today is going over the Cloud SIEM fundamentals, certification, and content. Maybe you got a chance to join us yesterday. I hope you did. And we went over cloud security and analytics. Hopefully you enjoyed that class. If you came back, that's a good sign. If you didn't join yesterday, that's perfectly fine. But today we have a bunch of content for you. So let's just dive in and then start doing the thing. So for our agenda here, it is fairly accurate. We're going to be together for the next 3 hours. So for the next 3 hours, we have content and we have a certification exam for you. The first 2 hours are going to be taken up with the content, with some labs, with some slides, that kind of material. And then the last hour is set aside for the exam. So we'll talk about the exam later. Don't worry about it too much. If you joined yesterday, you probably already have a feel for how our exams take place. Hopefully you've taken one with us before. If you haven't, that's perfectly fine as well. But so we'll be doing that exam. But until then, we're doing, kind of as it describes here. So we're going to start to look at the Cloud SIEM data pipeline, what it is, why it's important, and set some terminology, definitions, things like that. Then we're going to do some labs. Then we're going to look at threat investigation with Cloud SIEM. Then we're going to do some labs. Then we're going to look at customizing and tuning. And then we're going to do some labs. So you kind of see the theme going on. And then, as mentioned, we'll take that, get that exam out of the way. We'll take a break probably in about an hour and 15 minutes. Certainly feel free to step away whenever you'd like. Let's see, any other ground rules? That should be about it. So let's start. As a reminder, this is true yesterday, true today, true tomorrow. If you take any of our certifications and pass them and send the certificate to us, you'll get a $15 Uber Eats voucher. And that is cumulative. So you can go ahead and take a few classes. You took one yesterday and got the exam and cert done. If you're doing one today, got one tomorrow. That's three meals on us, essentially. So certainly encourage everyone to do so. And I'll remind you about this again later because most of you are interested in it. So like I said, just a good opportunity for us to reward you for learning. Let's get into it. So let's talk about the Cloud SIEM data pipeline and what is Cloud SIEM. So what is Cloud SIEM? So Cloud SIEM is a cloud-based enterprise-grade security, information, and event management system. And so that's where that SIEM acronym comes from or stands for, is security, information, and event management. And SIEM is certainly outside Sumo as well, not just the Sumo thing. Our Cloud SIEM leverages Sumo Logic's core functionality and includes data collection, ingestion, storage, and threat intelligence. And so some of the things we talked about yesterday are going to appear again today as topics or themes. Certainly, if you did not attend yesterday, like I mentioned, that is okay. That's perfectly okay. You'll still know what's going on, but I might allude to some of the things we talked about last night. Let's see what else. Oh, Cloud SIEM. So it's a purchased add-on, and we have an ever-expanding library of content designed for security operations. And since it's designed for larger data volumes, many organizations, or most organizations, need to ingest a large amount of data each day for insights to surface in Cloud SIEM. So what do we mean when we talk about insights and surfacing? So this is the Cloud SIEM data pipeline. Cloud SIEM is a powerful tool, and what it's going to do is take millions of log messages and funnel them down into a handful of actionable security insights. So how does that work? So first, at the very top of the screen, there we go. The logs are going to be collected and ingested by Sumo Logic into messages. Then, there we go. They are going to be parsed. So those messages that are collected are going to be parsed, mapped, and enriched into Cloud SIEM records. And yesterday we did a little bit of we learned about parsing, and so similar idea, taking those messages and extracting information from them and giving them field definitions. That's essentially what the parsing is doing. So after that step occurs, now we have records. Now, once we have these records, too fast on the mouse. Once we have the records are going to be compared to rules. If a rule is triggered, an entity is going to be extracted, and we'll talk about entities in a few moments, what that means. A severity score is going to be assigned, and a signal is going to be created. Now, if you have enough of these signals with the same entity cluster together, they become an insight. And so we're going to focus on the later stages of this pipeline in this class. Today, we're really focusing on the rules and the investigation, really the bottom half of this diagram, the last two levels, if you will. If you want to learn more about the top two levels, the ingestion, the parsing, the enrichment, that's what we'll be doing tomorrow. So that's the Cloud SIEM administration class focuses on that. So you take this diagram, split it in half, bottom half we're talking about now, top half we're talking about later. Now, in regards to that top half, still want to go through the pipeline in a little more detail, even though we're not focusing on the collection and ingestion for today. But for today's example, we're going to assume we're going to use a Sumo Logic Coffee. And so this is imagine a real world organization, and they currently collect and ingest millions of log messages into Sumo Logic. Now, typically you can use these messages right away in Sumo Logic apps. To use them in Cloud SIEM Enterprise, your admin or you do need to enable data forwarding. Once again, this is something we talk about in more detail, but I do just like to mention it because it's an important feature of enabling that data forwarding. Your admin can also help you with the log mappings, the field extraction rules, and other pre-processing steps, as well as parsing steps to extract the right data. And we'll talk about that more tomorrow. Now, continuing along the journey, before Cloud SIEM can generate security insights, your log messages must go through a little processing first. And so this is where some of that part is going to take place. So first, Cloud SIEM is going to process the messages into records. Each record is going to contain the information from a message, and it's going to be parsed into key value pairs, mapped to the Cloud SIEM schema, and enriched with other data. So let's take a look at that. I have an example, or at least a visual of what this, what I just tried to describe. So let's follow a simple log message down this pipeline. So first, there we go. We have, actually, there we go. My mouse is being a little jumpy. Sorry, jumping ahead on those mouse moves here. So first we have our messages going to be parsed and extracted from the record. Now what's going to happen next is it's going to be mapped into a set of key value pairs. And this process is going to fix some basic formatting as well. So what's occurring in this step is creation of semi-structured data. On the left-hand side of the screen, in this example, where we have IP-127-0-0-1. When the parsing step occurs, it's going to extract the IP address into a key value pair, like we see on the right-hand side of the screen. And the data is going to be also normalized. So it's going to take that IP-127, give it a key name like source device _ IP, and the value is going to be 127.0.0.1, but those hyphens are now normalized to dots. Once this occurs, the information is then mapped onto the Cloud SIEM schema. Now, finally, the record is going to be enriched with information from match lists or threat intelligence databases like CrowdStrike, as we saw yesterday, such as the threat level. So what we're being told here now is the system has ingested this message of IP-127-001. It's normalized it and determined that its threat level is low. And so now we're starting to get good information about things that are occurring in our environment. All right, let's keep going here. And certainly any questions, feel free to shout. And we'll get into the labs pretty soon. 3 more slides, I think. All right. So we've taken our messages, gone through the parsing, gone through the mapping, the enrichment, and now we have records. Now let's keep continuing down this pipeline. Each record is going to be ingested into Cloud SIEM, and it's going to be compared to hundreds of built-in as well as custom rules. If a rule triggers, an entity is going to be extracted and a signal is going to be created. If a record matches the criteria specified in a rule, then Cloud SIEM is going to create a signal. The severity is going to be a number between 1 and 10 that tells Cloud SIEM how serious the potential threat is. So when a signal is created, it's going to contain the name, the entity, the severity, the stage, the description. A signal is always going to contain at least an entity and a severity. And this data is going to be defined by the rule and going to be used by the Cloud SIEM's insight engine algorithm. And we're going to look at that rule creation in just a few moments. Now, the entity, I've referred to it a few times, but I don't think I've really defined it yet. The entity is going to, in a signal, is going to be something like an IP address, a MAC address, a host name. The entity is going to tell us who or what was involved in the event that the record described. These entities are extracted from the records, and every signal is going to have an entity. The entity's activity score is going to be the sum of all the severity scores of all the signals that appears in. So talking about rules, turning those into signals, utilizing that severity between 1 to 10 to tell us how serious things are, and that entity telling us who or what is involved in the event. Now, Cloud SIEM is going to take everything one step further and correlate these signals into a manageable number of insights. And so an insight is a group of signals clustered around a signal entity. An insight is created when the sum of the severity scores of signals with the same entity goes above a certain activity score within a certain time frame. And we're going to look at a better example of the times and the numbers I just provided. By default, the activity score of 12 within the last 14 days is going to trigger those signals. So for example, if a rule is triggered, if a rule was created with a severity score of a 6, and it triggers 2 rules that both have 6, an insight would create it because you would have a severity score of an activity score of 12 being above 14. Like I said, we'll look at those numbers in more detail in a few moments. We have a better illustration of how the exact numbers, of what levels you have to get to, but for now, I just wanted to introduce them. Now, once you have an insight, which is going to be those activity scores added up, so once you have the insight, then you can start your security investigation and take actions like alerting a SOC teammate, executing playbooks, whatever action that might be. All right, one more slide here, and then we'll get into the labs. And I didn't really want to load. Didn't intend to have my bubbles pop up right away, but that's okay. For a visual, this is fine for right now. We're going to get in and actually see this image that I'm showing on my screen in more clarity in just a moment. So, but this is the entire data pipeline. So the entire data pipeline can be thought of as a funnel with the log messages going in the top and the insights coming out the bottom. And so while you might ingest millions of logs, you will probably only get a few hundred signals and maybe a handful of insights. And so what this insight radar in Cloud SIEM is using is that funnel shape from a top-down perspective. So as you go towards the center, there's going to be fewer items. So what I'm showing here, and like I said, I apologize for the text kind of blocking things, but the outer ring. So here we have our records, our signals, and our insights on the top right. In the center, the outer edge is representing the records that have been ingested. So this dark blue line is showing the relative number of records in the last 24 hours, very similar to a clock. There's spikes, there's dips, and these represent times when more or less records than average were ingested. In the middle ring, we see these bars. These are the signals that are being generated from these records. Here, the bar is representing the number of signals generated at that time. Getting even more granular, we have our innermost circle. And what we see here are insights that have been correlated from signals, excuse me. So we have our insights in the middle ring, represented by the triangles. And so what we've seen, and we're going to see this in, like I said, in a better illustration in just a moment, but we've essentially ingested a lot of records, distilled that into a handful of insights, and then gotten into a smaller handful from signals to insights. All right, so let's go ahead and let's jump into the labs. So we're going to go ahead and utilize these credentials. Let me go ahead and paste these in. They are the same credentials we used yesterday. If you joined us yesterday, great. If you didn't, that's fine as well. But it's going to be the same scheme that we used yesterday. So as a reminder, service.sumologic.com, training plus analyst number. So pick a 3-digit number to represent your user. Maybe you want to be training plus analyst 123, 234, 741, pick a number. As people are doing already, once you've logged in successfully, if you can let me know that number, that's good. Cool. So let's go ahead and log in. And I need to share something else. Hold on here. So we have a lab guide here that I want to provide. And okay, looks like many of you are in. Great. And now let me add, that lab guide. Okay, so in the chat should be a PDF that contains the lab guide, and go ahead and open that as well. So we're going to have essentially, and let me log in as well to join you in this madness. So come on.
Good evening. The chat window is disabled from my company. So is there any way you can send to me?
Can you chat in? Can you type in the chat or no?
No, I completely disabled. I don't have anything.
Yeah. Hold on, just give me a moment here.
Hey, Josh, is it okay that if we go back in and we were here yesterday, we actually end up seeing our dashboards and everything from yesterday? Will that get in the way of what we're doing today?
No. So it won't have any interference. Feel free to delete them if you want, just to clean up your spot, but we delete them periodically. So
Right. Thank you.
no reason to clean up after yourself unless you're just that type of person. All right, so I'm logged in. Let's see, we need to get the lab guide to Ravindra. Let's see, how are we going to do this? Odell, can you go ahead and send an email to this gentleman or individual? What is your email address? Sorry to throw you on the spot here, but I can't really figure out a better way to get your contact info.
Yeah, ravindra.manavarthi at morganstanley.com.
Okay. All right, Odell, if you can go ahead and send that to him. Cool.
Ravi, you can call Ravi. Easy.
Okay. Oh, hey, Ravi. All right. All right. I think we're good. Let me see. Everyone else okay? Let me go ahead and share. Let me share the PDF. So here it is. And actually, even if you don't have the PDF, you'll still be able to kind of participate anyhow. But all right, let's go ahead and I think we're good. Let me see. Okay. So yeah, sorry. So we should be logged in. We should have our lab guide. You may have, as indicated earlier, some tabs open. Feel free to close them or not. Doesn't really matter. We're not using them for today. And so let's go ahead and use our lab guide and follow along here. So first step with the lab guide is logging in. And so we've done that successfully, I believe. Now, the next portion is where we want to vary from yesterday. So yesterday, we spent our entire day in this environment. This we call SIP for Continuous Intelligence Platform. And I think I Gave a little plug for SIP yesterday, or not a plug, but mentioned it. But today we want to go into the Cloud SIEM Enterprise. So what we want to do on the bottom left is click on Cloud SIEM Enterprise. And for anybody, just going back to anybody that needs the lab guide, if you need the lab guide, if you can email Odell, so email him at ogordon@sumologic.com. So Ravi and I think a couple others. So ogordon@sumologic.com. Cool. So when we click on, hold on. This probably worked for you. I forgot I need to VPN in just because I'm a Sumo employee. So I apologize. I should have done this earlier as well. Sorry. Okay, so let's just do this one more time. So we should be in Sumo. We should click on the far left in Cloud SIEM, and we should be brought into a screen that looks pretty identical to this. So hopefully you did. If you didn't, let me know. But this is where we want to intend to go. So where are we? We are now in Cloud SIEM Enterprise. So the interface is certainly different from what we saw yesterday. There'll be some very few similarities, a few, but the environment is different. All right. So what we want to do now is we want to go ahead and click through, lab one. Is do lab one. So what we want to do in lab one is we want to introduce this screen. And I'm going to move my lab guide over to the side. So what's going on in this screen? We described the Insight Radar a little bit earlier, but there's obviously a lot more going on in here. And so I want to start to dig into it. And the lab is going to have us work through what's going on the screen. So what we're seeing here, let's start with the top left, is records, signals, and insights for the last 24 hours. So by default, it's going to be the last 24-hour period. And what we see here, and it really starts to give a good example of the scale and the ability for this feature to work, or to benefit us, is we see here that over the past 24 hours, 26,000 records have been ingested. So 26,000 log messages essentially have been ingested and parsed and all that. From those 26,000 records, 10,000 signals were detected. Of those 10,000 signals, there were only 3 insights. And so as a individual who might be concerned about this kind of cloud SIEM, cloud security, or security and cloud SIEM information that's being provided, I only have 3 things that I need to actively look at. Normally, I might have to go in and look at 26,000 records to find a bad culprit or a bad actor. And the system is now telling me, well, there's really just 3 things I need to check out. And so that's quite helpful, obviously. We see here the insights by the status telling me for the time period where the status of these different insights. As we're going to see shortly, or pretty soon, you have the ability to modify these statuses. So in this case, we might have 3 insights, but somebody might have worked on the first one and closed it already. They might be working on the second one, but there's really only 1 new one. So as I come into my day, I see there's 1 new insight that nobody has touched, and that's what I pick up and go about my day and start to work with it. The Insight Radar here, as described, we have the 3 rings. So we have the top ring, which is representing the records. We have the signals, and then we have our insights. The insights are going to color coordinate to the status. This ring in the center, it may evoke to you a video game feel, and that's intentionally so. This heads-up display, or HUD as it's often referred to, was designed by somebody who worked on World of Warcraft, which was or is still a very popular video game. And so it's meant to evoke sort of that, I don't know if it's a video game or technology, it kind of has a cool feel to it, in that you can look at it and at a glance, you're getting a lot of information. That's what a heads-up display is intending to do, is, as you look at it, give you a bunch of info. On the far right, we have the insight activity. But we'll talk about this in a little bit, but what it's starting to show us here, just since it's on the screen, I'll talk about it, is the idea of an insight that's been detected, a time period on the x-axis, and the y-axis is representing that severity. And so based on various things happening, this could be determined to be high, or if less things are happening, low. And we'll go through those calculations of numbers of what needs to occur for something to be high or low. What else in here? Oh, sorry, let's go through the lab one. So here, these lab steps get a little repetitive, but it's still a good walkthrough. So for lab 1A, what we want to look at is how many records have been ingested in the last 8 hours. And so as a reminder, you want to use the time feature up here, or not a reminder, I haven't shown it to you yet, but this is where you access it. And so if we want to see how many records from the last 8 hours, select 8 hours, system refreshes, and we see 8,000 records have been ingested in the last 8 hours. 8 hours. And during that time, there have been 0 insights, which is good. Nothing's really going on. 1B is asking how many signals have been created in the last 7 days. So once again, choose our time feature, stick it on 7 days. And now, we get a better example of the scale of things that this is helping us with. 200,000 records, so a 250,000 or 1/5 of a million records, 23,000 signals, but just 21 insights. So averaging about 3 insights a day. I can handle going through 3 insights a day. I don't think I can handle going through 200,000 records over 7 days, or 30,000 records a day, or what have you. And so this is where it's just showing off a little bit, if you will. How many insights have been created in the last 24 hours? 7 days, modified to 24 hours. And then we see how many insights have been created. We should see 3. Time zone might impact these answers. It shouldn't, but I'm just thinking now, you're 24 hours, it should be the same. So you just might have these signals and bars kind of tilted 90 degrees, or depending on where you are in the world. Okay, so that's lab 1, step 1, or portion 1. Lab 1, step 2, or portion 2, is now having us look at the center ring and using the insight radar. So if we go ahead and set things, or it wants us to answer what time were the most records ingested in the last 24 hours? So set it to 24 hours if it's not already. When were the most records ingested? So that would be the peak here. So probably right about there. Not being too specific, but yeah, it would be probably here closest to the end. When were the fewest records ingested? So that would be this valley, if you will. 2B, or not to be, what time were the most signals created in the last 24 hours? So signals, I'm not quite sure why we're not getting some signals here. I feel like I should be. I'll be checking later, because we're kind of missing a little data in here, but that's something outside this class. But we have enough data in here at least to work for today. So when were the most signals created? I don't know, I guess right about here, where they're all kind of about the same. When were the least? When the bar is really low. And then how many insights have been generated in the last 24 hours? Little bit of a trick question, not really, but so you can have multiple insights represented by a single triangle. So while it appears, if we're using the triangles, that there were 3 insights, we could have one of these that has 2 in the same time period. Now up here on this insights on the top left, it tells us 3, and that's what we need. But just to let you know that the number of triangles may not always correlate with the number of insights. Oh, it's going to correlate, but it might not match 1-to-1. All right. Let's keep going. What we want to do now is we want to look at some of the rules. I described the rules, or briefly described them, but now we want to start to dig into them. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use the top nav bar, and we're going to go to content, and then rules. So top nav bar, content, rules. When you do this, what you should see are a lot of rules, probably about 650, 634. And so what these rules are, and we'll talk about these in more detail as well, but at least from what we're seeing now, these are rules that have been created probably by Sumo Logic or somebody related to us or affiliated with us. And so these rules are rules that we have included. You can create your own rules. You can modify these rules, and we'll look at both of those experiences later today, probably about an hour. But these are the rules that exist in the system. Now, there's, as mentioned, 634 rules, but you can, of course, filter and look for rules that might be specific to your needs. So, for example, if you wanted to look at the rules that were utilizing or involve firewalls, excuse me, go to the filters. And we're going to add a filter. So we're going to click on the filters. We're going to use the name contains firewall. And what we should get are a few rules. There we go, 11 of them. And so now we're looking at the firewall rules. For each rule, we're seeing stuff, it's not a great description, but things about it. So we're seeing the severity score. So if this rule is triggered, this is how severe this thing is versus a lower severity score. So now we're starting to get higher or lower severity scores. What else do we need to do here? What we can also do is look for rules that have a specific severity score. So if we wanted to look at the firewall rules and look for those that have a severity score greater than 8, we can actually do it a few different ways. We could select the severity option and sort by it. And see which rules have a severity score greater than 8. Well, actually, none of them do. Or what we could do is we could use our filters as well. So if we want to look for severity greater than 8, I don't think there's going to be any in here because, yeah, there aren't any firewall rules, but there could be. And then the same idea in 3C, the persistence. So these are going to be tactics, and we'll talk about tactics and techniques shortly, but we have the abilities to start to look at these. Persistence. So I'm just using filters. Filters shouldn't be new to you, of course, but in Sumo, this is how they work. We'll be using them a few times today. All right, let's see. So that pretty much concludes lab 1, step 3. Let's do step 4, because step 4 is going to show us the entities. So to do so, we're going to go to the top of the screen and click entities. We want to remove any filter that might be there. There may not be any too, but if there is one, remove it. And now we see these entities. And remember, these entities are these who or what's. So we see usernames, we see IP addresses, and mostly those two, and host names. So these are all nouns, if you will, that have proper nouns have been identified by the system. And so now we see these entities. When we're looking at these entities, once again, we can start to utilize our filter. So if we want to look at entities that have, as it says here, an activity score greater than 5, we can go and use the filter and do activity score greater than 5. And we should get 3 total entities. How many entities have a score of 0? I can get rid of that filter, what am I doing? Activity score. Oop. Activity score is 0. And then we see that. And so question, really the discussion question, I don't know that we're going to really discuss it, but what does an entity of an activity of 0 mean? Basically, it means that the system has identified this, but does not associate any activity with it. Pretty straightforward. within the time period that is been allotted. All right, cool. Let's see, anything else in this lab? Oh, and then the one thing is the top left corner, although we've actually changed colors on it. But if you want to get back to that heads up display, go to the top left and click on the Sumo icon. All right, let's get back into the deck. I have a few more slides, and then we'll do another example. All right, so just 1 second here. All right, so what we did in lab 1, looked at the summary, looked at the insight radar, looked at the rules, and then looked at the entities that are being tracked. Now what we want to do or continue is getting started with threat investigation. Now we have a few different use cases we're going to use, or at least discuss. We'll probably just use one of these based on time, might use two. But we have a few different examples of fictional companies, such as Financial Logic, Sumo Pharma, and Sumo Coffee. For today's examples, Financial Logic, and I don't think we're going to use this one later, but they're going to be a major player in the banking industry. They meet all the GDPR and international compliance standards, but they worry their big investors are a target for hackers. You have a company like Sumo Pharma, which is a healthcare company that ships prescription meds to patients. They meet all HIPAA standards and guidelines, but they are concerned about data privacy. So they want to monitor all their data and make sure their patients are safe and healthy in the digital world. And then we have Sumo Coffee, small retail business, big tech idea, automating the entire coffee business from bean to cup. In addition to consumer protections like PCI, DSS, their main concerns include keeping computing costs down while their startup grows. And so we're going to look at one or two of these shortly. Now, within the threat investigation world, threat investigation is considered reactive, where threat hunting is proactive. Now, typically threat investigation happens in response to an alert. Once you've investigated a threat, you can hunt for similar threats and take precautionary steps to prevent attacks from happening again. Threat investigation in that way is an iterative scientific process, much like troubleshooting. In both threat investigation and troubleshooting, you first monitor your system. Once an anomaly is detected, you can make a hypothesis about how it happened and diagnose the problem. As you dig deeper, you may revise this initial hypothesis and find more clues about why or how the attack or event happened. As you investigate and trace the events, try to answer as many WH questions as you can behind the event to tell the story. And so those WH questions are, who is behind the event? What assets did the event affect? Where did the event occur? When did the event occur? Why did the event occur? And then finally, how did the event occur? Once you've thought about these or answered some of these, you can take action to resolve the issue. There's going to be many actions you might want to take in response to an incident. You might want to work with your IT team to isolate and wipe laptops that have been infected with malware. You might need to work with your HR team to enforce mandatory anti-phishing training to prevent your employees from being exposed in future attacks or exposing themselves. And so there's many different actions you might take. Now what I want to talk about or show is a day in the life of a SOC analyst, especially using Cloud SIEM, because Cloud SIEM is going to help with every step of the threat investigation process. Cloud SIEM is going to automatically detect and monitor potential threats by analyzing millions of records and distilling them into a handful of insights with a low false positive rate. You can choose insights from the home page of the Cloud SIEM in the Insight Radar under the Insight Activity pane or from the Insight panel. And we've started to kind of go down that road. Once you choose an insight, you can dig through all the raw logs and signals to conduct a deep dive investigation and even proactive threat hunts. You can organize your thoughts, make hypotheses, and take notes about your investigation in the comments of each insight. This will share your ideas with your SOC teammates and help you keep track of your investigation. You can also take direct actions directly from the insight. So you can email teammates, create JIRA tickets, execute playbooks, and many other custom actions with the actions button. And then finally, you can update the insight. You can mark it as in progress or closed. When you close it, you can mark it as resolved or false positive or duplicate or no action. You can update the status correctly, and that's going to help you, or really help the Cloud SIEM Insight Engine produce more accurate insights for your org in the future. And then as a SOC analyst, this process is going to repeat each day as new insights are generated for you to investigate. Now, I kind of mentioned this term earlier, very briefly, but I want to go into it in a little more detail. And what I wanted to talk about here is what's called the MITRE ATT&CK matrix. What is this? So what the MITRE ATT&CK matrix is, it's published by an organization called MITRE. They're a nonprofit research organization, excuse me. And when we say MITRE ATT&CK, you'll notice the word attack is spelled creatively, excuse me. What attack stands for is adversarial tactics, techniques, and common knowledge. And what this MITRE ATT&CK framework does is it organizes and categorizes the tactics and techniques that hacktivists, super criminals, nation states, scripters, and other adversaries use. And so this is going to include attacks like exfiltrating databases and installing malware and stealing credentials, all these other nefarious activities that you and your SOC team are trying to stop. And so Cloud SIEM is going to use the same tactic names for the stages of signals and the names of insights. Once you become familiar with ATT&CK, the acronym, you can navigate Cloud SIEM's insight pages easier. So if you're familiar with ATT&CK, great. If you're not, that's fine too. Basically, we use similar naming conventions, or not similar, we use the same naming conventions. I'm going to paste in the chat just a link about directly to the MITRE ATT&CK website. So like I said, if you want to read more about it, cool. If you're not that interested, that's fine too. No exam questions on it, I think, pretty sure. All right. A couple more slides. So when we're talking about our fictional companies, which MITRE ATT&CK tactics and techniques might they prioritize? So for example, Financial Logic, those individuals that are concerned about their clients' data security. Credential access might be a concern for them. Since their customers have users' credentials tied to their financial accounts, credential access is important. Sumo Pharma, they are concerned about patients' privacy and compliance. Certainly they're concerned about credential access, but exfiltration of private data is, let me take that one more time. Exfiltration of private data is a major concern for them. And so that's a different concern. Sumo Coffee, of course, they're concerned about exfiltration and credential access, but their main concern was resource management and making sure their apps are as efficient as possible. Execution is going to be a particular concern because executable files can utilize precious computing resources. So all these organizations may have different concerns. All right. A couple more slides here. So the insight page, I said I pointed this out earlier. I didn't. We looked at insights, but not at the insight page. We'll look at this shortly. This insight page is going to be important because it's going to show us everything we need to start unraveling the security event that's taking place. When these signals cluster together, Cloud SIEM is going to use these tactics and techniques to name the insights they generate. The insight's name is going to point to how the event occurred or why the adversary is behaving that way. For example, a tactic name like discovery or persistence is going to show the reasons the adversary has. Similarly, tactic names like initial access or execution can tell us a little a little about the methods the adversary used. These names are just starting points, however, and you may need to revise your hypothesis as you continue in your investigation. So here, for example, we see credential access, and we may use that example next. Just a few more screenshots. Now, within the Cloud SIEM threat investigation, time is going to be important. Timeline is going to tell us everything because it's going to tell us when the event occurred. We're going to see whether each signal was occurred or triggered at the same time or sequentially, as well as whether everything happened over minutes, hours, or days. By default, insights are related signals that cluster together within the last 14 days. So what we see here is a 14-day window, and we see signals occurred several days before the others, but some of them were clustered more closely together. So we see here on the far left, something occurred. About a week later, something occurred. And then about 5 days later, 3 things occur. And so that's interesting to notice that those 3 things that are clustered together occurred in a similar time period, as well as more recently. Now, within the threat investigation, once again, the entity, I've alluded to this a few times, will a few more times, and that entity, once again, is going to be the who, the what, the where. And so that entity might be an IP address, could be location of a database, many other pieces of the puzzle. Each insight is only going to have one entity, and it's going to be clustered around. All right. So let's go ahead and let's go back to our lab guide. Let me find mine. Where did I put mine? Here's mine. So here's my lab guide. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to lab 2. Now within lab 2, we have 2A, 2B, and 2C. We're going to then correspondingly do lab 3 next. Makes sense to do lab 2 before lab 3. And with lab 3, we're going to use the same A, B, or C. So if we do lab 2B, we're going to do lab 3B. If we do 3C, so on and so forth. We're probably just going to do one of them, but feel free to do the other ones either now or later. Just like I said, only so much time. The one we're going to choose, let's do lab 2B. So we'll do lab 2B together. So what we're doing here is, and I know it says try this lab on your own. We're going to go through it together. Well, of course, feel free to jump ahead and start working on it. But what we're going to do is we're going to pretend we're Sumo Pharma. And so as it says, while working for Sumo Pharma, we receive an alert about insight called exfiltration with credential access, and we want to find out what happened. So let's do it. So what we're going to do, I'm going to get my lab guide out of the way, and I'm going to go into my heads up display. Hopefully everyone's in their heads up display. And we want to go specifically to insights. Now, when we're in the insights, and let me, let's modify this. We have a few different views we can use. It doesn't really matter which one. They both are beneficial. One gives us kind of panel view of the new and the in progress. But what we want to do is we want to look for an insight named exfiltration with credential access. So we can go ahead and look for it in here. We can also go ahead and utilize the filters. So as we were playing around with earlier, we can go ahead and go up to our filters. Oops, that's not closed. Oh, let me get rid of it. I got a bunch of, there we go. So what I did here is just in case you didn't see that, is I just used the filter. I didn't really pick a field. I just pasted in the insight name, exfiltration with credential access, hit enter, and I should see a whole bunch of them. I'm just going to pick one. It really doesn't matter which one we choose. And if we use the same one, it doesn't really matter either. All right, so let's go in here. So what do we want to do? So we want to pick one of these. So let's pick one. Now, what's going on in here? Well, that's exactly what we're about to figure out. But what do we see in here? So we see a lot of different things. We see the name. label. So it's given it a unique ID, and it's gone ahead and specified the MITRE attack framework that it most closely associates with. We see a status. So in this case, we see this is new. If this was in progress and might be worked on by somebody, and but we're getting a feel for that. The assignee, who is it assigned to? If it's not new, it's somebody might be working on it. We see the entity. So we see that host name, that unique identifier, if you will, the who, the what, the where. What else do we see? We see the severity of the insight, and we'll talk about that in a few moments. We see the timeline. So this was describing earlier, or not describing, you saw on the screen, but here we have a window, a short window, not a 14 day, more like a 7 or 8 hour window. We see rules that have been triggered. In the timeline, we see them represented by the blue diamonds. And so we see this rule triggered, then this rule triggered, and then this rule triggered, and so on and so forth. And now what we're going to look for is the correlation or the causation, or what happened. Why did this rule trigger? So let's figure it out. Why did this rule trigger? And what triggered? So let's look at the rules that triggered. So down below we have 4 rules. So let's see what happened. We see here that guard duty detected an unauthorized access and marked that with a severity score of 5. So sort of concerning. Here, within the same time frame, there was a guard duty alert, a low activity score, but certainly relevant. Then what we see here is this guard duty alert of this pen testing that's taking place, penetration testing. And then we see unusual volume. And this is really the big flag. They're all important, of course, but this is one of, oh, this is an 8. We see a lot of unusual, traffic volume is unusually high, or unusual. I guess it doesn't have to be necessarily high, but it is quite unusual. And so using this, what occurred? So we want to kind of piece these together. Here are the 4 events. What happened? Why did what happened? And so what we see is, first, there was the unauthorized access. So that was detected. Then guard duty detected penetration testing for a user called Kali Linux. So the system is detecting that penetration testing is occurring. And then what we see later is the usually high traffic for our AWS region US East 1. And so what is occurring here, and there could be a few different things occur, but what is telling here is Sumo Pharma, as I mentioned earlier, they're very into looking at vulnerabilities and doing penetration testings and things like that. And so this was just the exercise of somebody doing some legitimate testing. If we had gone to our managers or our higher level security individuals, and they said, no, there's nobody doing penetration testing right now, this is quite concerning. But since there is a corresponding reason for this occurring, then we know that. And what we can do here, and I think we're actually going to do this in the next lab, is we can then start to make an action on here. Maybe we want to send this to PagerDuty or Slack it or close the insight. And so we have those options. And we're actually going to do that shortly. So I guess I shouldn't have shown these actions, but they're good for you to see. All right. So that's lab 2B, is looking at the insight and drilling into it. If you want to take a look, as I mentioned, one of the other labs, the other insights, feel free to. They're going to be pretty similar to this, as far as just showing a very simple story. All right, let's go back to the deck. Let's see. Yeah, let's keep going here. So as we looked at, with Sumo Pharma, what we found is just there was routine penetration testing taking place. And the MITRE ATT&CK framework was utilized to give it a good name because it was exfiltration with credential access. It was just legitimately that exfiltration. It wasn't a bad actor. All right. Yep. All right, so what I want to do now is I want to look at a deeper dive into threat investigation and threat hunting, a few slides here, and then we're going to go back into the lab we were working with and close it up. But let's go through a couple slides here. So insights. The insights are going to provide a great high-level summary of potential security events. Because of Cloud SIEM's threat intelligence and sophisticated correlation engine, very few insights are false positives, so they're all worth investigating. However, sometimes you may want to investigate deeper to really understand what happened. Or you might want to do proactive threat hunting work to help you find potential problems before they begin impacting your system. The signals list or the signals tab rather, lists all the signals that have been created by rules that have been triggered in the system in the last 14 days by default. So signals are going to provide summaries of potential security threats. Remember, not all signals are security incidences. After all, as we kind of saw, there might be legitimate reasons why somebody might be logged into 2 different devices at the same time, or why there have been several failed password attempts on an account. Like we saw earlier, there might be some pen testing, and that makes perfect sense. When you click into a signal, you're going to have the option to see the full details of the record that triggered it. And this is going to include information like the IP address, the geolocation, threat level, and other information that can aid in your investigation. The Entities tab is going to list all the entities that the rules have detected in the last 14 days. And so we saw that earlier, and we're seeing actually the Entities tab on the screen right here. It's going to show the activity score. The activity score, once again, is going to be the sum of the severity scores of all the unique signals associated with that entity. When an entity score reaches when an entity score reaches 12 or higher, an insight is created. And if you have several entities with high activity scores, that might be a good starting point for a threat hunt. Now, context actions are going to be found throughout Cloud SIEM's UI, and it'd be helpful for in-depth investigations. Many entities in the insights, the signals, and entity pages have context actions. And you're actually seeing right now the image on the right-hand side of the screen is detailing exactly what we're referring to when I talk about context actions. Essentially, the system is, or not the system, you are going to an item, and we'll look at some examples shortly, and then have an ability to choose a wide variety of different actions. And so we'll look at some of those actions, like I said, in a moment. Your admin can also add custom actions, custom context actions, and we'll look at those tomorrow. We'll create one. So you'll experience this in a moment. Now, an in-depth threat investigation is going to use the most of Cloud SIEM and Sumo Logic's core tools. There's several ways to bring information you find in Cloud SIEM back to the Sumo Logic platform. One context action is the Sumo Logic search, and we're seeing this right now with this IP address. We're taking an IP address, we're going to the context actions, we're selecting Sumo Logic search, or I think we do it on the next screen, and then it takes the item and brings it into Sumo Logic, the SIP environment that we are more familiar with. Here's a better example of it. So what we're doing is we're taking this IP address, selecting, in this case, Sumo Logic search, and then that IP address is now brought into the Sumo Logic SIP environment. And now we could say, show us all the places this IP address has shown up, and then start to investigate in that manner. And then finishing the investigation, I did allude to this. I started to show it. I guess I was getting a little ahead of myself again. But in Cloud SIEM, there's going to be several different actions you can take on each insight. You can comment on the insight as well, or you can close it, or you can assign a status to it. When you close the insight, Cloud SIEM is going to use that resolution information to reduce false positives and duplicates further. So assigning a status to the insight lets you keep working on it. It can also help you keep track of your progress. And then you can also assign that insight to yourself, a colleague, and you can use those action buttons to, as we saw earlier, or see on the screen right now, alert colleagues, create JIRA tickets, send Slack messages, and utilize other APIs. Those actions, as mentioned, are customizable, configured by the admin. So if you want a new action, contact your admin, or as we'll learn tomorrow, how to do it ourselves. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go back into the lab guide. Here's my lab guide. And we're going to go into lab 3, and we're going to choose lab 3B, the Sumo Pharma. So, as it says right here, while working for Sumo Pharma, we receive an alert about an insight called exfiltration with credential access. What we want to do now is we want to use Sumo Logic Search to continue the investigation and then update the status. So let's go ahead and do so. What we're going to do here is we're going to, ideally, we're still in the screen that has our exfiltration with credential access. If not, go back into it or another insight. It really doesn't matter which one you pick. Well, I guess you should pick the one we're all doing, but it doesn't matter too much. And what we want to do here is we want to utilize the entity. And when we hover over the entity, there we go, we should get these 6 dots. When we click on the 6 dots, we should get the context actions. And as shown, we have a wide variety of them. We can look up, do a Google web search, do a virus total search. That's not the point of today. Today's point is Sumo Logic Search. So we're going to go ahead and select that. And when we do, this IP address or this entity should be brought into the Sumo Logic SIP interface and then queried. Now, in this case, I have no data yet. The time range might be relevant here. So this is just looking at the last 15 minutes. This IP address was from actually a while ago. So let me go ahead and do the last 24 hours just to see if I get some data in here. And if I don't get data, that's okay too. Oh, I do, cool. So this is now showing me this IP address or this host name has been associated or shown up in these log messages over the last 24 hours. It's been associated with guard duty, a lot of guard duty, mostly guard duty, all duty actually, or mostly guard duty, I guess, some other stuff here. But now we're starting to get that insight. Now, what we want to do here in this lab is we want to go ahead and look in Sumo Logic, look for this host name and find it in our log messages and look at what types of log messages it's being found in. So what do I mean by that? What we're going to do is we're going to do a new log search. We are going to use this host name again, so keep it kind of handy, but we're going to do a new log search. And we're going to paste this query that's in step 6, that's in our PDF into onto the screen. And what I want to do here is I want to replace insert host name with the host name that I was just playing around with. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to run it. Actually, sometimes pasting from a PDF is not a good experience. This is not a Sumo thing. So you may have to redo those quotes like I just did. But that should, oh, and then last 24 hours. Just to make sure we get some data in there. And so what we should be presented with now is not just a list of log messages that have this host name, but the device IPs that are associated with it, as well as the username. And so now I could see, oh, Rico is associated with this guard duty alert. start digging down that path. And so good symbiotic relationship between Sumo and Sumo, Cloud SIEM and SIP. All right, let's see. We're probably gonna take a break now. We're doing pretty good time-wise. So let me just see. Yes, you could also turn this into a parameter. Yeah, absolutely, Jarvis. Good call on that. Do the squigglies. All right, so let's go ahead. Yeah, let's do a break now. So let me go ahead and let me get that stopwatch going. We'll do a 10-minute timer again. We're pretty good on time. So once again, I'm going to take a break, or we're all going to take a break. And then we'll come back in 10 minutes. We'll continue. Take the exam. Should have you out of here a little bit earlier as well. We're not halfway, we're past halfway. So we'll come back, probably do about 15, maybe 20 more minutes, maybe, and then we'll get into the exam. So go ahead, enjoy your break, grab a beverage, and then come on back and we'll continue. So thank you, everybody. right, everybody, welcome back. Hopefully you had a nice little break. Let's go ahead and let's just pick up and continue. So yeah, so let's see, where did we leave off? I'm going to go back to my deck. And we did this. Okay, so we're up to here. Oh. So what we're going to talk about next, and really the last portion for today, is customizing and tuning your Cloud SIEM environment, hence the slide name. All right, so a couple of slides, and then we'll go back and do one more lab. So I've alluded to this many times and giving you hopefully a little information about it, but Cloud SIEM rules, what are they? So once you've completed a few investigations, you may want to add or modify the rules, the data sources, the match lists, and other pieces of the Cloud SIEM puzzle. These modifications can help reduce false positives or alert you even faster. The most common thing you want to customize are rules and insights. Rules are one of the most important pieces of Cloud SIEM's threat detection engine. All the records that are ingested in Cloud SIEM are compared to every rule in Cloud SIEM. Remember, records are just normalized log messages. If there's a match, an entity is extracted and a signal is created. Those entities are then tracked and may correlate with other signals to create an insight, which is where most threat investigations begin. Now, there's a variety of, different custom rule types, and you don't have to write your rules from scratch. As we saw earlier, the Sumo Logic content team creates and maintains hundreds of out-of-the-box rules to get you started. And we saw those earlier when we saw the 513 rules or something like that. Those rules are updated frequently, often every day, every few days. But sometimes you do need to write a rule from scratch. You might do this if your system has a source that isn't covered by the default rules, or you're looking for a threat that isn't covered by the default rules. Custom rules aren't updated or deleted by Sumo Logic during the regular updates. They're going to be independent from the default rules. So if you do decide to create a custom rule or rule tuning expressions, those rules will not be modified or deleted by Sumo's regular updates. Now, there's 4 types of rules that exist. Match rules. You're going to take a simple Boolean statement, check if it's true or false. If it's true, then an entity will be extracted and a signal is going to be created. For example, you might want to look at whether an IP address matches on a banned list. If it does, it matches the rule. If it doesn't, then it doesn't. Very simple, very binary. Threshold rules. These are going to be triggered when a match is found a certain number of times. So for example, if 1 failed login attempt is acceptable, but 5 isn't, then a threshold rule would fire after the 5th failed login attempt. Chain rules. These are going to fire when certain different events happen in a certain time window. For example, if you want to look for 5 failed login attempts followed by 1 successful login within 1 hour, you'd use a chain rule. Sorry. And then aggregation rules. You're not going to really use these too much, but they are triggered when up to 6 different events accumulate over time. For example, if you want a rule that's going to look at a large number of event types from a single device IP, you might use aggregation rules. But like I said, we're not going to use them at all. I don't think we use them today. Now, this is a blank rule template in Cloud SIEM. Fairly straightforward. You have the left-hand side of the screen and the right-hand side of the screen. The left is the if, the right is the then. So on the left, you're going to put what criteria needs to match. If it matches, then a signal will be created. So when a rule is created, you configure the condition it matches. It's going to be typically a short piece of code and will depend on the rule type you're creating, whether it's going to be a chain rule, whether it's going to be a match rule, a chain rule, a threshold rule, etc. You can also add rule tuning expressions, which are going to be small exceptions to the rules. And these are going to be appended with an end statement. Once you've set the condition to fire, you can configure the signal that will be created. This is going to include details like the name, the entity, the description, the MITRE attack tactic and technique you're looking for in your rule. And then finally, you're going to be able to configure the rule severity score, which is going to be on a scale from 0 to 10, 10 being the most severe. You can choose a severity of a 0, maybe if you want to monitor something, but not necessarily create an insight. Higher severity scores are going to be more likely to trigger insights. And we'll go through some examples of these rules in just a few moments. 7 more slides if you're counting. Now, before you create the custom rules from scratch, there's going to be some best practices that you want to follow. First, you want to check the existing rules in your system. As mentioned, Sumo Logic already has hundreds of built-in rules, and so you may not need to write a new one. Or you may need to only make a small change to an existing rule, like adding a rule tuning expression or adjusting a severity score. You need to know your system well. You need to understand the schema and log mappings of all the records that are ingested into Cloud SIEM to write effective rules. And you may need to work with an administrator on your team who knows this information to write better rules. Now, if you attend tomorrow's class, we're going to go over that information and you'll get that knowledge of how to write better rules. But if you don't, your admin can help. It's important that you know your system details about log mappings and other metadata, but you also need to understand your company's risk tolerance or the risk appetite and their priorities. For example, some companies might want to monitor a large amount of outbound traffic, but not consider it a threat. So they might assign that rule a severity of 0. You might have another company that's very alarmed and concerned about outbound traffic and consider it data exfiltration, and they might assign that same rule a severity of 5. Both are correct, a 5 and a 0. It's just what is a priority or more important to you or your organization. Knowing the types of rules is important. If your case requires a chain rule and you're trying to write a threshold rule, you might not have a good experience. And then finally, this is really probably just an overall best practice, but certainly when you're writing a new rule or editing an existing one, you want to make small changes. So if you want to decrease the severity score, rather than taking a severity score from an 8 to a 2, maybe go from an 8 to a 7. Monitor that. Is that being too noisy, not noisy enough? Then go to a 6 and so on and so forth. And then finally, another best practice, and we're going to do this best practice today, is saving all new rules as a prototype. And what this allows you to do is, or allows the system to do, is monitor the rule's behavior without creating any new insights and alerts. And so we'll do that as a step to just kind of help our training environment stay sort of clean. All right. Rule tuning. So adding a rule tuning expression to an existing rule is really going to be the easiest way and most common way to customize your rules. And as I mentioned earlier, the rule tuning expression is going to act as an end statement that you add to an existing rule. It's usually going to be just some simple logic, and you should use rule tuning expressions. We encourage you to use them. With rule tuning, you can modify existing rules without rewriting them from scratch, as I just mentioned. Once you've written that tuning expression, you can also apply that tuning expression to multiple rules. You can apply multiple tuning expressions to each rule, so you have a lot of flexibility. We're going to learn how to apply one tuning expression to multiple rules, and then we're also going to learn how to apply multiple tuning expressions to one rule as well today. And then finally, when you use the rule tuning instead of the custom rules, your tuning expressions are retained. So when Sumo updates that rule, that retention is still there. Sorry, I'm not quite sure what happened there. So when Sumo updates the rules, it gets pushed out to all the users and doesn't mess up yours. So rule tuning, good. All right, a couple more, and then we're back into the labs. Now, once the rule is in your system, whether it's a custom rule or a rule that has been created by the Sumo team, doesn't really matter. Cloud SIEM is going to then use we'll use it to create signals. So we're going to take the rules and use those to create signals. If a record matches a rule, remember that entity is going to be extracted from the record, and that entity is that IP address, a username, domain name, what have you. Once an entity is in the Cloud SIEM system, Cloud SIEM is then going to track the total severity score of the signals associated with each entity as an activity score. Once the activity score gets high enough, usually over 12 by default, then an insight is created. And so I have a good illustration of this coming up right now. So what we're going to look at right now are insights when they get grouped into signals and when they're above that activity score of 12. So let's look at an example. All right, here's our example. So let's say we have 13 signals in our system from the last 2 weeks, represented by the right-hand side of the screen. Each shape on the slide is representing a different signal. So we have pink triangles, we have green squares, and we have blue circles. The signals for entity A are going to be the pink triangles. For entity B, those are going to be the green squares and the blue circles. So grouping by colors and shape size. And based on the rule that fired, each of these signals is going to have a severity score, and that's going to be the number shown in the shape. So let's start to look at these. And remember, by default, an entity needs an activity score of 12 before an insight is created. The activity score is going to be the sum of all those severity scores from the last 14 days. So let's look at each shape separately. Starting with the starting with the pink triangles, and there's 3 of them. They have a severity score of a 5 and a 6 and a 7. Are those going to cluster together into an insight? And think about it for a moment. We have our blue circles. They have a severity of a 1, a 1, a 2, a 2, and a 3. Are those going to group together to form an insight? And then finally, we have the green squares. 1, 2, 2, 3, and 4. Are those going to group together to cluster into an insight? So remember, we're looking for an activity score of 12. Which of the shapes or colors are going to cluster together to form an insight? So think about it for a moment. Hopefully you have some answer in your mind. So let's see, are you correct? We have our images going here. I like how the animation kind of moves around and groups the things, but let's talk about these. So let's start with the entity A, the insight 1. Or, well, I just told you it's an insight, but let's look at the pink triangles. Those are going to cluster together into an insight. Even though those are only 3 signals, they have a relatively high severity score. 5 plus 6 plus 7 is 18. That's above that limit of 12. And so those are grouped together to form an insight. The green squares at the bottom, entity B. These are going to cluster together into an insight as well. Now here the severity scores are relatively low, but there's a bunch of them. 1 plus 2 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 12. 12 is equal or above 12, and so that turns into an insight. Now what about the blue circles? These are not going to turn into an insight. Now Cloud SIEM is going to track the entity in the entities tab, but it only has an activity score currently of 10. 1 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 3. So until another rule with a severity of 2 or higher triggers that entity, it's not going to turn into an insight. So what I want to show here is, as you can see, you can have a large number of low severity score signals that won't create an insight. You can have a small number of high severity score signals that do create an insight. And so you want to keep that in mind as you start to configure those severity scores with your custom rules. All right, 2 more slides. Now, what if you want to be alerted right away when a certain rule is triggered? Or you don't want to rely on the default activity score of 12. Well, custom insights, that's what's going to help you. Because this is going to let you create insights based on one specific signal, a chain of signals, regardless of their severity score. This is also going to be helpful for known threats that are specific to your system. And the other advantage of those custom insights is you don't need to change any of your existing rules or insights. They keep working normally. So no adjusting is always good. One less thing to do. All right. Now, remember, Cloud SIEM's out-of-the-box rules and insights are great, but we want you to have the flexibility to customize your environments. And so we learned 3 simple ways to customize Cloud SIEM's rules and insights. We looked at, or are going to, we will look at these, the rule tuning expressions. Going to be simple ways to add small exceptions and other clauses to existing rules. You're going to have those custom rules that let you write logic that's unique to your system to cover threats or data sources that aren't covered by the built-in rules. And then finally, those custom insights that allow you to get alerts based on just one rule or a chain of rules. So what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and jump back into our lab guide, go ahead and pick up with lab 4. So going to go ahead. Now, one thing that may have occurred, probably occurred, is you probably got logged out of Sumo. The timeout is set for 30 minutes by default, and it's been probably longer than 30 minutes since we were touching anything in there. So you may need to log back into Sumo. I'm going to go ahead and put those credentials back in the chat. If you remember them already, kudos. If you don't, that's fine as well. But let's go ahead and get logged back in. Let me grab those credentials. Okay. So I'm going to, just log back in. So now we should be logged back in. And we should have our lab guide. And so what we want to do is go down to lab 4. Here it is. And participate. So for lab 4, what we're going to do is, once we're in Sumo, we want to get back into Cloud SIEM. So if you forgot how to get there, once you get logged into Sumo, go to Cloud SIEM Enterprise on the bottom left. And that should take you into the heads-up display interface. Once you're in here, well, you're here, so you're in a good spot. And now we want to go ahead and start to create some rules. So we're going to go to the content option on the top of the screen. And now we're going to do rule tuning. Previously, we looked at the rules, but now we want to tune them. Once we select rule tuning, we will see, or should see, yeah, actually we haven't created any rules. So that's fine. Sometimes if we had old data, they would show up in here. So you might see people from this morning, but the environment was clean. So actually there should be no rules. If there are, that's fine. But so once we're in rule tuning, content rule tuning, we're going to go ahead and create a new rule. We're going to need to give the rule a name, and we give you a naming methodology to utilize, and I'd encourage you to do so. It'll make my life easier when I have to clean this up later. So we're going to want to call it tuning expression, and you don't have to be super exact with the name, but put in your initials and throw in a number, something like that. Like I said, it doesn't have to be super exact to that. So we gave the rule name. That's a good start. Now we need to find the rule that we want to identify. Now, what we're doing here, and I should have read this portion in lab 4, is why are we creating a rule tuning expression? Well, what we're doing here is we're updating, as it says, some of our firewalls, and we don't want to trigger unnecessary alerts. So what we want to do here is we want to go ahead and write a rule tuning expression that will allow us to bypass fire-related rules. So we have our rule tuning expression name. Now we want to look for a rule that we want to modify. In this case, we want to look for a firewall rule because that's the scenario. And specifically, I want to select the AWS Network Firewall Alert Training Rule. So now I've selected my rule, but now I need to have an expression that's going to match. So what I want to do here is I want to go ahead and add the line that says user_email. Let me just grab the whole line and I'll paste it in here. So I'm going to grab that line and paste it right there. Now, a couple of things. One, you're going to want to go ahead and modify the numbers to represent the numbers you're using today. It doesn't really matter. We're not, not really doing too much with these rules, but I would want to go ahead and modify it. The other thing I need to do, and this is another just a PDF issue, is you'll notice in the screenshot in the lab, the email address is in red text, and here everything is in white. And this is once again just PDFs being funky. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and modify the apostrophes. So just redo them, and then that should turn red. We are using also the is not operator here. No, I guess, yeah, I don't know if I call it an operator. I guess it is. And we used this yesterday, and this is being used as an exception. Excuse me. So we're basically saying, except for us, do something. Once we have everything just typed in properly, click submit. If we don't have it typed in properly, we should see a little exclamation or triangle, rather, excuse me, orange triangle with that. There was a question, can you use wildcards from narrow values? Sure, absolutely you can. And so now this has been saved. And what we want to do here is I would just want to verify that it has been saved. So what I'm going to do is just go back to content, go back to rule tuning, and should show up. Let me refresh the page like it recommends. Just want to see at least one rule in there. Oh, there we go. Cool. All right, good. Oh, wow. A lot of you are playing along. Good to see. So here we see all the different tuning expressions that we all just created. Great. All right. What we're going to do next is pretty similar, but we're going to do a custom match rule. So we're going to go once again back to content, back to rules, as we did earlier for rules. Now, this time we see all the rules that exist. And once again, these 631 of them are rules that Sumo Logic has created for you that you can utilize. But what we want to do here is we want to create our own. So we're going to click on create. When we click on create, we need to choose what type of rule do we want to create. As discussed earlier, there are 4 different types. 3 of them you'll use more frequently than others. That aggregation just isn't used much. And I shouldn't keep downplaying it. I mean, it's quite helpful. Just it's not used as much. But what we can do here is decide what type of rule we want to create. In this case, the scenario is we're concerned about traffic coming from a specific IP that's not covered by the default rules. So we want to create a match rule that's looking for a specific IP address. And so in that case, we're going to use the match rule because that's what a match rule does. It looks for a simple condition. So we're going to go ahead and create. We're going to give it a name. So once again, we're going to use naming convention similar enough to what we used previously. We're going to go ahead and grab this IP address here. So this portion that needs to be triggered. So when a record matches the expression of this IP address, we want it to trigger. Now, once again, we're going to need to modify our apostrophes because the text is in green, not in red. Once again, just an artifact of PDFs. And so we'll just redo those. Now what we're going to do is add a tuning expression. And we're just going to select add tuning expression. And then we're going to either create a new expression, or we can go ahead and utilize the, so we can either choose one, or we can go ahead and create one. What we want to do here is we want to use the expression that we created earlier. So I want to choose a tuning expression, and I want to find my JB one. And then for step 7A, et cetera, we're just really going to follow the steps. So the entity that we want to use is device_IP. That's that who or what did it. The name, the name doesn't really matter, although let's be consistent. So I'm going to do my name is Signal. I have to do 2B2. The summary and description, those really don't matter for today, so I'm going to put test. You'll also notice actually, I want you to notice it. Here is the orange triangle that I was referring to earlier. And so if I don't have something filled in correctly, it's going to let me know. Description is required. Oh, let me put the description. And now what we can do is we can set the severity score. So what do we it says to use 1 that would be appropriate, but we can put what we want. Maybe this is a 0 or a 1. Maybe this is 10 and really warning. Well, we get to decide that. In this case, we're going to put 1 because that's what we're told to put. And then we're going to choose a tag. So we can go ahead and specify what tactic and or technique, not and or, which tactic or technique we want to utilize. If we want to use one, we don't have to. And so we're going to specify initial access. And then before we save it, once again, we're just going to click this, save this rule as a prototype. And then we're going to click submit. Once it's done, it should say the rule is created successfully, should return you to this screen. But just to be doubly sure, if we now go to content and rules, I should see my rule. I should also see some of your rules as well. So now we go from, well, let's see, JB234. Yep, and there's my rule. All right, cool. Last one, I think. Yeah, the last one. So this is gonna be a custom insight. So if we want to be alerted right away when our custom match rule is triggered, we can create a custom insight. And so that's what we're going to do. This custom insight is only going to apply to this single rule. So how do we do a custom insight? Well, follow the steps. Go to content and go to custom insights. Somebody's already in there doing them. Great. So or this one was earlier, but let's go ahead and create one. Once again, with the naming convention, and you'll notice it puts that that name right in there for me as the insight name, which is helpful. You can modify it, but it's a nice little added help. Now here for my if, I want to do when signals are created from the following rules. So I don't want signals to be created based on signal names. I want it to be based on the rule. Now I want to go ahead and look for the rule I created previously. So I'm going to look for this one. Oh, there we go. So now I have my rule. I can specify order here as well. I can fill it in description, which just leave generic. And I can go ahead and provide some tags. Once again, click submit. And then the custom insight should be created properly. And then once again, just to verify, we'll go back to content, go to custom insights, and I see mine somewhere in here. Oh, there's mine, and then there are yours. Cool. Nicole, good question. Any rule for log4j? Not that I need to check with support. We probably do. I just don't know specific ones for it. But good, very good questions early. I think I need to check on that. In fact, I will check on that. Good question. All right. Let's see. So that really concludes the lab portion for today. Let me go back to my deck. Yeah, we did the labs. Yeah, all right, we're good. So let's get into the exam portion. Certainly, if there's questions, please ask, of course. But you guys have been pretty quiet. That's okay. But the exam. So let's do the exam now. If you took the exam yesterday, you know where I'm going with this next conversation, and feel free to start the exam and be on your way. But certainly, for those of you that have not done this before, I want to walk you through it. So first thing that's going to be most important, or I guess, yeah, most important, is when we get into Sumo. And actually, I didn't show this earlier. I should have. I apologize. If you go to the top right of any screen that you're in Cloud SIEM and go to the three dots, here's how you can get to the continuous intelligence platform, or more of the traditional Sumo environment. So just click on that to do so. Now, when we take the exam, we don't want training analyst 234 getting credit for the exam. We want us. So you want to make sure that you log in with your Sumo accounts, probably provided to you by your administrator, your manager, or your employer. So make sure you do that. Everybody, many of you did this yesterday, so you already know how to log in, but just as a reminder, make sure you log in as the right person. Once you do log in, go ahead and actually let me log in to show you. I didn't type that right. Oh, I did. Cool. So once you get logged in, go to certification and choose get certified. Once you're in this portion, choose get certified again. And what we want to do is find the exam that we're interested in today. The exam for today is going to be the Cloud SIEM fundamentals exam. This one right here. The administration exam, that will be tomorrow. So select the Cloud SIEM fundamentals exam and register. Start. And take it. Let's see. So as a reminder, same rules as yesterday. It's about 20 questions. I think this one is, it's about 20 questions. You'll have 60 minutes to take it. You're not going to need that much time, but you have it allocated to you. Remember, we're supposed to be here for another 75 minutes, so you should get out of today's class early, which I'm sure nobody has problems with. You need 70 to pass it. And it's going to be open resource again. So like our other exams, they are open resource. You have access to documentation in real life, and I think you can use it here, or I believe you should use it here as well. And so we would encourage you to do so. And then probably more importantly, the Uber Eats, just as a reminder. So once you're done with that exam, go ahead and send us a copy of their certificate to training-promotions, and I'll leave this up, and we'll send you that Uber Eats card within 48 hours, probably 72. The individual who does that, I think she's going to be out tomorrow. So cool. So let's see. Yeah. So go ahead and start. It looks like a few little questions here and there. I'll go ahead and answer them. But once again, I'll go ahead and just throw myself on mute, and I'll be here if any other questions come up. But thank you for attending. Hopefully you can join us again tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to be the admin portion. So we're going to continue with the top half of the data pipeline. And that'll be a good way to wrap up the week. Let's see, question.
I have one question.
Yes.
So for taking the exam, this my email address or training email address?
No, so your email address, so not training.
Okay.
So, yep, good question and an important question. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
The other thing, no, actually, yeah, that's it. Sorry. All right, so once again, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you again for attending. Feel free to disconnect, once you're, whenever. You don't have to hang out with us the whole time if you don't want to, of course. And then, hope to see you tomorrow. So thank you again, and good luck.
My pass. It's saying that please verify your credentials because I use registered my email address. So I'm not able to log into the system with my user. I'm not able to log into the system. My password is not working. Anybody there?
I think if you're logging into your company's SIEM, and you probably should have a process how you would get logged into there, because I think you're taking the exam through your company's account.
And if you don't have an account, you can create one real quick from Sumo. But if you do have one, in the bottom left-hand corner when you log in, you should see your name. And you click on the name from there. I'll bring up to that main page and look at the home